So hey, do you guys remember what life was like before, like all this? Yeah. I bet you do. It was January, right? February, like most of February. Like, do you ever just wish for simpler times? So like I was born in 1983. And I know that makes some of you gasp, because some of you think I'm really old. Others of you for other reasons. So my like prime growing up years was in the 90s. So I look back at like the 90s and think, man, those were simpler times. And that might be because I was a kid, right? So I was a little kid and I didn't have things like bills and soul-crushing responsibility and all those great benefits that you get when you become an adult. So that could be the reason. It could just be because I was a kid, but you know, I'm willing to bet whether you're my age or you're younger than me or you're older than me, there's like a time that you look back to and think, man, those were the days. Like things were just simpler back then. Like right now, like all of you said, you remember what life was like before this. We're kind of feeling nostalgic for January, aren't we? Have you ever felt nostalgic for January in your whole life? No! No one should be nostalgic for January. But we look back at January and we think, oh, those were the days. But were they? I mean, you're thinking, no, there was snow. It was never the day. There was snow in March. March wasn't the day either. But, like, were things, like, so awesome back in January? I mean, sure, you didn't have to think about face coverings, you didn't have to think about hand sanitizer, and you could get a haircut whenever you wanted to get one, and Walmart was open a few extra hours, but when you think about those simpler times, and that simple kind of life that you desire, I know I didn't have it in January, and I bet you didn't either. There were times when I was just so overwhelmed, by times I kind of mean this weekend. There were times when I was just so overwhelmed by everything that was going on in my life and everything I had to do that I actually just couldn't keep up with myself. You got to be here this time. You got to go there that time. You got to make sure you talk to so-and-so. You need to call this person. You need to set up an appointment for that. And it's true for all of us, right? Like for those of you, the kids, you got to get the kids here at this time then. You got to get the kids there that time then. You got to set up a doctor's appointment. You got to do this and that. And everything just starts to snowball in your life to the point where you are running. And not only does it snowball outside, but it begins to snowball in your heads and hearts too, where everything is just picking up speed and picking up momentum. And we're running. And sometimes we get to the end of it and we say, like, what did I have to show for that? Like, I didn't maintain any of the important relationships in my life. I didn't have meaningful conversations with my family. They were all in the car on the way somewhere, and you know how those go. I didn't have depth of friendships and personal relationships. My yard needs mowed. This needs painted. Didn't have time to spend in prayer and doing my devotions like I want to do. It wasn't simple. It certainly wasn't simple like the way I wish it was simple. So when the pandemic started and things really began to shut down, it was a little weird, wasn't it? Like all of a sudden, you had evenings lined up with plans, and it all went away. Now, fortunately, like I think for a lot of us here, now some of us that wasn't the case for, but for a lot of us, a lot of the employers in our area were deemed essential or could do curbside pickup and that kind of stuff. So many people were able to find ways to continue to work, but everything else just sort of went away. And it felt weird. Like it actually made me feel a little bit anxious. Like, I gotta be forgetting something, right? There's nothing going on tonight? Nothing? We've become speed freaks. Like we like that pedal to the metal life where we're just going, and never stopping. We've kind of become obsessed with it. Francis Chan, in one of his videos. So if you remember, we were watching his stuff when we were doing the Letters to the Church series. And so he's been doing other videos. He's living in Hong Kong now, which is pretty fascinating. So he's talking to the church in Hong Kong, but the church in Hong Kong really kind of sounds like us. But he says that we've become speed freaks, and it's like we were running non-stop on treadmills where the speed was just picking up and picking up and picking up and picking up. And then in one moment, all the treadmills shut down. All of them stopped. And we didn't know what to do for that first little bit. Now, you know what? The good news is that some of us started to find a new way. Some of us started to find a new pace. Like some of you spent the most significant times with your children and your spouses that you have in months. You got to have dinner around the table and look each other eye to eye and have conversations that wasn't just the drive into town. Some of you got to be more intentional with your friendships, right? Because it wasn't going to be, well, I'll see them on Tuesday. It was, I don't know when I'm ever going to see them again. I better give them a phone call. And so you called people. And you had conversations and you asked questions like, how are you holding up? What do you need? Do you need anything? You saw your neighbors outside and you're like, man, I better check on them and see if they got toilet paper. I mean, we did these things, right? All of a sudden, you've got a relationship with your neighbors that came out of nowhere. You've been living next to them for years. But all of a sudden, maybe for the first time, you're having a depth of relationship with your neighbors that you didn't have anymore. You found some peace and some meaning in the middle of a crazy and chaotic world. You found what we really mean by a simpler life. See, a simpler life wasn't about clearing out the calendar. It was about having a calendar that's meaningful, and a calendar that's sustainable. Like sometimes we just get going so fast that the important stuff, there's nothing left of us for it. And so we just lose it. So here's the question that I would love for you guys who are watching online to leave in the comments, and for you guys who are here just to be chewing on. Like, what's been the best thing that you've experienced during this lockdown? And we asked that question way at the beginning of everything, right? Way at the beginning, we were asking you guys, hey, what are the cool things you're doing? And it was kind of like fun and novel, like, oh, we sat down at our dining room table for the first time ever, and it was kind of like this weird thing. But now you've started to find rhythms, and now you've started to find paces, because even though things are starting to open back up, there's a lot of things that are still closed. And so we found new rhythms and new paces. So I just want to know, like, what's been the best thing that you've experienced during this lockdown? And a little bit later, we'll get to hear from you guys about what you think. But you know what? So there's all this talk about this new normal. And you know what? I don't know what that means. Like, can I tell you what? I'm a person of routine and habit. You say the word new, and I want to go hide. Some of you have heard me say this 1,000 times. But in the lead up to mine and Katie's wedding, my routine was all out of whack, because there was all sorts of different things that needed to be done and blah, 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 blah. That wasn't about our wedding. That was just about life. I got to be careful. And then, so you know what? I'm like, one morning I'm praying and I'm like, I can't wait till I get back in my routine. Then I realize your routine doesn't exist anymore. You're never going back. So listen, when they say new normal, I'm like, oh, what? But you know what? I kind of do want a new normal. And we've been saying all along that we want a new normal for our church. And that's what we've actually been talking about before any of this pandemic stuff. Like back to January, we've been saying we want a new normal for our church. I want a new normal for me. And I think that's how we begin to see a new normal for our church. So what do I want this new normal to mean for me? Man, I want my time to be used in meaningful ways. I don't want to get to the end of the day and be like, I ran nonstop and I've got nothing to show for it. I'm going to bed late and waking up early. I don't feel like anything's happened. I want my time to be used in a meaningful way. I don't want a full calendar. I want this meaningful and sustainable calendar, one where I do things that matter and I can keep doing things that matter. There's no more where I reach the end of my rope and I can't do things that are important anymore. I want to be intentional about setting the pace of my life. I've been in the back seat for too long and just allowed my life to be like a roller coaster that's climbed up that hill and then it's just cut loose and it's going on its own. Man, I want to be intentional about the pace of my life. But then you stop and like, oh yeah, I should probably ask God what he wants me to do. Like, I mean, I want all this stuff, but is that really what God wants for me? Is that his way? Like, I think we've been preconditioned to think if the calendar's full, like, so back in the day when we had bulletins, do you remember bulletins? Ooh. You'd open that sucker up, and you'd see this whole list of calendar items, and you'd be like, I'm going to that one, and that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. And you felt good about it, right? You're like, look how cool and Christian I am. Because my calendar is full, and I'm meeting with these people and those people, and I'm going here and doing this, and blah, 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 blah. And like we become preconditioned to think we're being more spiritual when our calendar is packed, especially if it's packed with good things, with Christian things, with church things. As if God's just there cracking the whip, going, mush, mush, keep running. Like, I've been guilty of thinking that way. But did you know that when you open Scripture, when you open the Bible, and you turn to those first pages, did you realize some of the first words of the Bible are a schedule? Like, we see God did this on this day. God did this on this day. God did this on this day. And what happened on day 7? It's not a trick question. He rested! I'm sure someone was commenting that right now, and you get all the bonus points for today. He rested. This is what it says in Genesis 2. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of the creating that he had done. This is the Sabbath. It's a day of rest. In the Gospels, Jesus actually says the Sabbath was made for you, for us. It's this blessing from God. You see, from the very beginning, God said, I care about you, and I care about your time, and I care about your schedule, and I want it to be meaningful and sustainable, so let me show you how it's done. And so for 6 days, God did this amazing, incredible, meaningful work. And then he rested. Do you think he was tired and needed a nap? No. This is rhythm. This is life. This is pattern. So for many of us, like our calendars just got wide open. We got a clean slate. It's like our calendar was we thought we were writing in ink, but it was like a dry erase board. And God just took the cloth and wiped it all clean. So what if now that the calendar's clear, what if now if we could be intentional about the stuff we put back on it? What if the things that showed up back on our calendar could be because they were supposed to be there? Because they matched what God wanted for us? Because they were meant to be there rather than just stuff upon stuff upon stuff upon stuff? What would God want you to put on it? So I think, when I think you look at the life of Jesus, and you look at the early church, the church in Acts and throughout the New Testament, I think you begin to see that they had some priorities. And they weren't written down, like we're not going to turn to Acts 15:2 and Peter's going to say, listen, I think these are the things we really need to be about. I don't think we can see that. But I think there are priorities that they lived their life and time by. And so I just want to run through those really quick. Like, I think the first thing they prioritized is they prioritized their spiritual life. Like, their own spiritual well-being and health was at the top of their list. So throughout the Gospels, and particularly in Luke 15, we read that Jesus often just pulled away from everyone else to pray by himself. Some translations say lonely places, because he just needed to be alone with him and his Father. And when you think about it, like when you try to read the Gospels and you look for the days Jesus had, like when was start of a day and when was the end of the day, some of those days you and I would classify as nightmares because they were just out of hand, crazy busy. But at no point did Jesus say, you know what? Yesterday was hard. I think I'm just going to sleep in today. Peter, James, and John, can you keep everyone away from me? I'm going to sleep till 10. He knew. He knew he needed that time with his Father. He made it a priority. When you look at the early church, it's pretty fascinating. So not only were they meeting together in each other's homes, but they continued to go to the temple together. That they continued to meet together in a large group fashion. We're going to dig into some more of that stuff next week, but you know what? If your spiritual life has been taking a back seat, if you have not had time to create space for prayer and scripture reading, and I don't just mean reading your list to God and reading your verse of the day. I mean opening your heart to him and reading scripture and finding out what it means for you, then you're in a bad place. And that's where your schedule has to start to change. The second thing I think they prioritized was their family. So when we read Paul's words to the Ephesian church, he's talking about family. And when he's talking about family, he says, submit to one another. And then he goes on and says, wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. And then later he says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Okay, I don't think this is a news flash to anyone, but none of that happens without a significant time investment. None of that happens. You don't develop that kind of relationship and that kind of care unless you're putting the time in. Okay, so for those of you who are single and watching and don't have kids, you're thinking, all right, cool. Check that one off the list, baby. There's one I don't have to do. Okay, in some ways that's true, right? In some ways there are less ties for you to deal with. But you know what? You still got a family. And you need to invest in those relationships. Those relationships are still important. Your parents, your siblings, and so on. You got to have investment in those relationships. Our families, whether we have a family that has come from us or we're just part of a family, those are blessings and responsibilities. And God's given them to us, and they have to be a priority. Listen, the story of a whole bunch of broken families can be read in their calendar. The third thing I think they prioritized was community. And what I mean by community is this building of relationships outside their family. So when we go back to the book of Acts and you read the stories, were they ever doing anything by themselves? It just seemed like they were always together doing stuff. I mentioned they went to the temple together. They were in each other's homes together. They were eating together. They were studying and learning together. And I'm willing to bet they had a little bit of fun along the way too. See, our schedules become far more meaningful when we actually make time for these kinds of relationships. And you know what? This is one of the easiest things for us to cut when things get too busy. We just begin to be less connected to people outside of our immediate circle. And then one day, everything starts falling apart. And you just need someone to stand with you. And you got a hard time finding someone. So who do you need to stand with you right now? And maybe a better question, who needs you to stand with them right now? And the last thing I think they prioritized was they prioritized mission. So this might be the biggest one. They prioritized mission. This prevents us from becoming self-focused. I can manipulate all three of those other priorities to being about me, but I can't manipulate this one to being about me. The act of taking the gospel to people who don't know Jesus, that needs to be prioritized and that needs to show up on our schedule. Throughout the Gospels, we read stories about Jesus going out of his way just to find one When we look at the early church, like every step they took was a missions trip. They didn't think in like, well, in 3 months, we're going to go over to Samaria and we're going to open up a soup kitchen and we're going to pass out little papers. No, every step they took was a missions trip. We have to have that same kind of mindset to go out of our way and to say, you know, I'm going to work today, but I'm going on a missions trip today. I'm going to the store. I'm going on a missions trip today. Going to Walmart. Going downtown. It's missions trips. Like no one else is going to do that. Like no one else is going to bring the gospel to people who are lost. No matter what kind of government we ever have, they're not going to do it. The fire department is awesome at putting out fires, not awesome at sharing the gospel. The banks will keep track of your money, but they won't keep track of people's souls. The Kiwanis Club is great, but they're not sharing the gospel. No one is going to do it but us. And when I say us, I mean you. I mean you. Like we can wait for the next big program. We can wait for the next big activity. But that's not what I see in Acts. Every step along the way was a missions trip. For those of you who are single and don't have kids like we talked about earlier, I tell you what, this is like prime time for you. This is like main event, like you should be out there taking hills for Jesus. So on one of the last Sundays when we were all together and we were watching the Francis Chan videos, I said, if you're in your 20s and 30s, then we need you to take an upfront role in the ministry of our church. The pandemic didn't change that. That's still true. This is prime time. This is main event. We need you in the starting lineup. So you know what? There are different seasons of life that call for different paces. So if you are on that younger side, like I said, go after it. Go get it. There aren't these hindrances along the way. You can just go after it. And honestly, you probably like being busy anyway. When you're not on that younger side, it's a different pace, right? And there's different responsibilities and different things. But I think for as much as it's about the pace, it's about doing the right things at the right time. We got to be about doing the right things. Now, I get it. Some of you were like on board at the beginning. So some of you were like, yeah, whew, man, I'm all about clearing out that schedule. Let's do it. Then you're like, oh, 4 things, huh? That sounds busy. And there will be. Like, there will be times when it just gets busy. But the beauty of it is some of these things just happen simultaneously. You can be in community. You can be with other people, forming relationships, and care for your spiritual life. You can be on mission as a family. You can do these things in intentional, on-purpose ways and still breathe. Because when we get ourselves to do the right things, all of a sudden we have enough energy to continue to do the right things. I think most of us started out wanting to do the right things, and then things just got away from us. The pace got too fast. So what we're going to do is over the next few weeks, we're going to unpack those 4 priorities and talk about our schedules, talk about our calendars to see how we need to do the things we need to do and let go of some of those things that are just wearing us out and preventing us from doing the things that are important. But before we get to next Sunday, I'd love for you to do something. I'd love for you to grab your calendars, whether it's here or it's something you got tacked to your refrigerator or it's in a little book you keep on your desk. I'd love for you to take your calendars and, first of all, just rip out April and March because they just don't count, right? Just rip those suckers out and throw them away. But look at February and January and December and November. And actually take a look like, okay, what did I do that was for my spiritual well-being? What did I do that was for my family? What did I do that built community? What did I do that had me on mission? And what just didn't fit in anything? I think that'll give you a good sense of where you're at. You know, I believe that if we take these priorities seriously, that you'll see something different. No longer will your life just be on this crazy, crazy pace where you're running. But you'll have something to show for it at the end of the day. And you'll wake up ready to do it again. And I think when each of us is there, and then we start to see things happen in our community. We start to see things happen in our church we so desperately want to see. Our families will stop slipping away. Our marriages will be stronger. We'll have relationships that are deep enough that they actually enrich our lives. And the gospel will expand in Titusville. Not because we were so busy that we made it happen. Not because we squeezed one more thing and one more time slot on our own calendars. But because our lives were about doing the right things at a pace that enabled us to do it for the long haul. Take it in, feel your love, it's the peace.